Hi, I'm Doug Young, and I'd like to demonstrate the examples in the article on fingerstyle guitar in the November-December 2021 issue of Acoustic Guitar. We're going to use several guitars. Some of these examples are best suited for nylon, some are for steel string, but you can play them with anything you'd like. This example is a fairly well-known piece by Bach, Bourrée in E minor, written originally for the lute. And here I'm playing it on a nylon string guitar to have the sound probably most similar to the original intent. This is a great example of playing fingerstyle guitar and why we need to play with our fingers, because there's two independent lines. The music basically consists of a bass line against a melody. So we're playing the bass line with our thumb, the melody with our fingers, and we have to be able to use both sets of digits in order to play both parts. We couldn't do this with a pick. In learning this piece, it's helpful to know how each part goes. So we might start out by just learning the bass line by itself, for example. And then also to learn to play the melody. And so eventually, as you play the piece, you want to make sure that those two parts come out. However, in learning it and actually memorizing it, learning to play it, you also have to think about it sort of vertically, and think about the positions and think about how each note fits against each other. So in learning this, I would start by playing each vertical slice of notes together. It's kind of like a chord, but really with just two notes. So that was an example from Giuliani's 120 Studies for the Right Hand. It's 120 exercises, almost all of which consist of playing a C chord and a G seventh chord back and forth, but using every possible variation and permutation and rhythm with your picking hand. And I believe this is number 9 out of the study, and it's a good example of the typical technique when playing fingerstyle of assigning your top 3 strings of the guitar, the 3 highest sounding strings, to your first, second, and third fingers, and your thumb taking care of the bass notes. So in this case, we're simply playing the bass with our thumb on the 5th string, and then we play a pattern with our fingers, thumb again, and then play the same pattern with a different chord. So this is a great study to get used to the standard fingerstyle position of holding your thumb, covering the bass notes with your thumb, and the treble notes with your fingers. So that's a little bit of a flamenco style rhythm. It's a rumba rhythm. And flamenco, of course, is a very complex style. There's a lot more to it than this, but this is a simple example that you might get started with. And it's a little bit different than some of the other fingerstyle examples we're looking at in this article, in that it's not about playing independent lines with your thumb and your fingers. We're really strumming. And in fact, this piece consists of steady 8th notes. It could simply be just straight 8th notes. The rhythmic effect that's so important, that's the critical foundation of flamenco styles, is created by different accents, and it's created by using your fingers in a different way to create different sounds. So in this case, what I'm doing is a fairly typical rumba pattern, and you play it by doing a thumb down, then a thumb back up, and then fingers down, and then thumb up. And then what's called a gope, or a strike, a hit at the top, which also damps the strings. And then finish with an upstroke of your fingers and a downstroke of your fingers. There's also an accent on the 7th and 4th notes of this pattern. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. So it's very different than a sort of thing where we're picking out individual notes with our fingers, but it still requires fingerstyle in order to get those different sounds and those accents. Let me do that really slowly for you. Here's the rhythm. So it takes a little bit of practice, especially to play that at speeds, which is typically for flamenco faster than what I'm playing it. So that's a little bit of bossa nova, and two interesting things about this style. One, the rhythm is obviously one of the most important things, but also some nice jazzy chords. So in this case, we're playing an A minor 11th, a B minor 7 flat 5, and a E 7 flat 9. And the rhythm's most important. We're playing pretty much a steady bass pattern with our thumb. But playing chords with our fingers on the upper strings to create the overall rhythm. So that's an example of a blues sort of thing that might be used as an accompaniment in a early 20s or early 30s sort of blues style. And the key here is that we're using what's called a monotonic bass. So I'm simply playing straight quarter notes on the bottom string, in this case, on an E. And I'm slightly damping the string by resting the palm of my hand lightly on the string. And I'm also using a thumb pick so that I can hit it fairly hard, fairly percussively. And we just keep going that nice and steady. And then I'm playing with the top strings with my fingers. This is a D7 shape. I'm sliding it up to an E. That's an example of alternating bass. Some people might call this Travis picking. Actually, the kind of style that Merle Travis played was a little more driving, a little more muted, a little more up-tempo. Same thing with some of the country players, Chet Atkins. But many people simply call any style that involves what's an alternating bass, which means we go. Many people will call that Travis picking no matter how it sounds stylistically. This example is more like a folk pattern that you might hear Paul Simon or someone like that playing. So the basic idea is simply that. We play up the root of the chord and usually the fifth, or if we change chords, maybe the root and a third. And then with our fingers, we either play a note at the same time as the bass, or we play something in between. That's That's the first measure. And you can move your fingers around to pick out some little patterns. In this case, we've got a little bit of a melody going. So that's alternating bass. So that's a fairly simple pattern using tenths. Probably sounds very familiar because we've all heard the Beatles' Blackbird, which leverages this technique and uses a similar approach. Paul McCartney, when he plays Blackbird, uses a sort of a strumming, a hybrid thing of picking and strumming. And I'm not doing that, but all I'm doing is playing an interval of a tenth, a bass note and a treble note together, and playing up a scale. And in between those notes, picking an open string. So this is another example of a style that uses alternating bass. This is Hawaiian Slackkey, and I'm in an open G tuning. The Hawaiians call this taro patch tuning. The notes are D, G, D, G, B, and D. And we're simply playing a pattern using intervals of a sixth, little melody, while we're playing an alternating bass. And then the last little bit is a typical Slackkey sounding turnaround. So this is an alternate tuning example. And in this case, I'm tuned to D-A-D, E-A-D. D-A-D, E-A-D. A little bit like Dadgad, except that instead of a G here, which we would have in Dadgad, I've got the third string tuned down to an E. And it creates a little different sonority. A lot of things about alternate tunings are about texture, different chord voicings, different sounds. And also in this case, I'm doing a few things to create a different texture of what I'm playing. So for example, the opening measure, there's a bass note, and I'm choosing to do a hammer-on. I could pick the note, but that would be a different sound. It just creates a different sound, different choice, and a different texture. Another texture happens in measure 3. It's actually kind of a tricky technique. The melody goes like this. But my right hand, my picking hand, is playing, and I'm pulling off and hammering on notes at the same time as I'm picking other strings. So I play the first string, and as I pluck the second string, I pull off the first string. And then as I pluck the third string, I hammer onto the second string. So. Takes a little bit of practice to get used to doing that. Let's add the bass note. So that's a little example of some percussive guitar, a very popular contemporary technique for playing guitar that uses extended techniques. in only a couple cases are we plucking notes in a conventional way by using our fingers and thumbs to play notes. We're making sounds in completely other ways. In this very short example, there are about 8 different techniques that I'm using to create the sounds. First of all, there's some drum hits, and I am using the palm of my hand to hit the lower bout, calling that a kick drum. And then in addition, I reach over and just hit the lower bout as a snare effect. I'm also using a tom effect by moving my fretting hand here and hitting the top. And in another spot, I'm using the palm of my hand right above the sound hole. So we've got different sounds, and you can get different sounds all over the guitar depending on what you'd like to achieve. Basically using the top of the guitar like a drum. So in this example, it starts out with that drum pattern, and then briefly I play the guitar in a fairly traditional way. I play a bass note. I'm in dad-gad tuning, by the way. And then I hit. Another drum pattern. And then finally, I'm going to play with my fretting hand without any picking hand involved, hammer-ons and pull-offs. And then I'm going to reach over my hand and play a note by hitting with my picking hand, fretting notes and sounding them at the same time. And then what has come to be called an explosive pull-off. My hand is down, I'm holding the strings down, I'm just going to pull straight across. And then finally, we end up with a slap harmonic, which is done by hitting the flat of your finger right at the 12th fret. Depending on where you hit it, you're going to get different sounds. Creates a ringing effects similar to that type of harmonic, only with the added percussive effect. So all in all, we've got a whole bunch of percussive techniques here, and you basically have to work out your choreography so that you can play all these different things, get your hands going the same way. You take it very slow.